In this video, I'll be sharing some methods and tips for drawing castles in Clip Studio Paint. So, let's get started. We know that we can make a sketch, align perspective rulers to it, and with the ruler's help, we can redraw the lines of our castle. But how do we draw the elements of a castle? Here's our 2-point perspective castle. I've drawn all the way through on another layer, which is a good idea, and I've divided it up with the X to find the center. And these guidelines are to divide into thirds and fourths just to give me some extra guidelines to work with. I'm going to divide it again. And I've changed the layer color for each just to make them easier to see. It's actually a pretty good idea to do that because it can get really confusing. Okay, so to make a recess, just going to pick a spot and go back into the shape, choose how wide, and then just bring it back to the front of the shape. It's as simple as that. And again, draw everything, even what you're not going to be able to see once the drawing is done. Because you never know when you might need one of those areas to still be there, because sometimes you have to align it with other things you want to draw. So it's just better to leave it there on a different layer, and then that way it's there in case you need it. Just going to erase these out just for this demonstration so it's easier to see what's going on and that you can see that it does go in. So I'm going to go ahead now and make an overhang. So I'm just going to pull away from the shape this time and draw the floor first, which is helpful, the whole floor, and pull up from the corners. You can really choose where you want it to go back at. I'm just choosing the top because it's easy to see, and I have guidelines for it and all that. And again, draw the whole thing, even what you won't be able to see. I'm going to erase it out, just like before, just so you can see the shape, but normally you would leave that in there. Okay, now to make a window, first I'm going to change the layer color. So that way we can make our guidelines. And I'm going to start with dividing the window to find the center. And now to make the actual window itself, choose an area on your X, and then you just use the perspective ruler to bring it across and down. Doing that, make sure that your window is even all the way around. So it'll be touching the same point on one end of your wall as it is on the other. And then to show some depth for the window, we're really just going to do the same thing we did to make a recess. Choose a corner, go into the shape, and then down. And then as before, I'm going to just show that you should draw the whole thing, but I am going to take it out just so you can see what everything is supposed to look like. Now I'm just going to move this out of the way so that I can center the window, so I can divide it into panes. Yes, you do have to divide the window separately on its own. You can't use the one that was already there. Really, you should, when you make the X, it should go all the way to the corners that we actually erased out. But since it's such a small, a shallow depth, we don't have to worry about it. It won't really matter. And there's our divided window. That arrow shape that I made will divide a shape into thirds if you draw that little kind of arrow over top of the X. Okay, so now we're going to make a doorway. And it's the same as making a recess, just like before, but I will show you again anyway. And I'm going to throw a window up here. Do the same thing as before. Going to divide it, and that finds the center, but this time we're going to bring it up past the top of the window. And we're doing this because we're going to make it an arched window. So for an arched window, you need to bring the center line up so you can see where the apex of your circle needs to go. And with this, you can draw it by hand and just make your little arch like this. So if you take that out, ta-da, arch. But if you want it to be a little easier, a little neater, just take this back out. Okay. You can use a figure tool and actually use the ellipse to make your arch for you. And then just get rid of all the unnecessary bits. There you go. So to add some depth to the window, do the same thing you would do as if it was square. And actually, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of treat it as if it's a rectangle. And find the depth. And really, you can do this at the top of the arch too, which will help you find the thickness for the top of the arch, but I'm just gonna guesstimate right here. But if you want to be exact, draw that other box. So now we're gonna do a surround for a door. So you go from the outer corner to the outer corner when you try to center for this, not the inner corners, because you're doing something for the outside of the door. If you wanted to put something on the inside, then you would put the X in the inside. And just going to add a little depth for the outer area because it does stick out away from the wall. So you treat that like an overhang. And I'm just going to draw a line across to make sure that both sides are aligned. And then you just take out what's unnecessary, just like that. So if you want to, you can go in and add some stone detail using your perspective ruler. You can just choose the intervals, or there is a way to make sure you do it evenly. I'll show you later. Okay, we're gonna make those little things that go on the top of a castle that go up, down, kind of like teeth. Yes, they're called crenellations. So we start by, we're gonna make the boundaries first. So at each corner, I'm just going to make a guideline up. You can make them longer than they need to be. They'll be erased later, doesn't matter. And I'm just going to change my layer and just make a guideline for how tall we want those crenellations to be. And using the perspective ruler, I'm going to follow the contours of the building. Now for our overhang, remember how we erased out that back corner? We got to put it back because you need a guideline for where that corner is. Even though you won't be able to see it, you have to know where it is to be able to properly place your crenellations. So we're going to pull it back and across. So this is why it's kind of important to make everything a different color so it's not as confusing. Okay. Now we're going to show how far down they come and go across the whole thing again, including the area we can't see. Now we just choose for our first brick, where is it going to go? And of course one side is wider than the other. Then choose how much space you want in between. It's entirely up to you. And then you make your next brick. There is a way to make sure these bricks are the same size and evenly spaced, but I'll show you that later. For now I'm just going to put them in here just for the sake of showing how it's done. So add the thickness using your perspective ruler. And you'll do this all the way around. Don't forget to draw the tops on. All the way around. Now that we're coming to that back corner, this is where it can get a little confusing because you really have to put some thought into how the bricks are placed and remembering the thickness of each brick. Even though a lot of this will be erased out, but it'll make sure the parts that you can see are aligned evenly. I mean, you can also guess, because really it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to look plausible. And that should do it. Try to put a little bit of thought into how you place your bricks, otherwise it can look a little awkward, like that inner corner. I normally would have divided that a little bit better. Looks a little weird. So now we're just gonna complete the bottom part of the spaces to complete our crenellations. So now I'll show you how to evenly space those. So just choose like a basic size for how big you want them, and then you make a guideline down the middle. Try to find as close to the center as you can, and then go from the top of one through the center of the second one, and where it reaches the bottom guideline is where you put your next line. And you will keep doing that. So I'll go to the next one, cross through the middle, and then you draw your next line. And you'll do that all the way down. But of course, they have spaces. So you have to do the same thing for the spaces in between. Otherwise they won't be there. So you make a line choosing how far apart you want them to be. And then you kind of eyeball the same thing on the other side. Just make a guess. And that is your guideline. And you do the same thing from the top of one through the center of the second one, and where it crosses that bottom line is where you put the line for your space. And there you go. And then you just need to trace over everything and draw the rest of your bricks for your crenellations. Just keep crossing them over until you get as many as you wanted. And then using your perspective ruler, you'll just complete the shapes. Don't forget to leave your spaces. And don't forget to fill everything in. So let's make some supports for our overhang over here. You can also use this for making bridges. So extend it from the wall. I'm gonna go back, like I said, leave those corners in there so you can see it. And down straight from the bottom of our overhang so it intersects the wall, and that's where our pillars are gonna go. The line across, just make sure that they're aligned with each other. Okay. And I'm drawing a line across at the top too, for the same reason. Let's just start to draw it in, deciding roughly how thick you want it to be. And then I'm going to bring it across to the other side so I can make sure they're the same thickness. And you would do that in both directions, but I'll show you that a little bit later. Okay. And bring it up. So let me show you. I'm gonna bring across. You don't have to put this part in here, but I just like to have a little section above it. Now you see I just threw the thickness in for the far pillar. There is a way to make sure it's the same thickness as the nearer pillar, but I will show you that in a sec. Okay, and this is how you do it. You bring it back. I'm gonna put a center and X in here first. Okay. So I'm just gonna bring it straight back and then straight across and then straight up. I know where to bring it across at because of the X. It's just like when you center a window, where it intersects the X is where you change direction. And that will make sure that your pillars are the same thickness. So just going to clean it up a little. so you can see what's going on since there's so many guidelines. And also I'm going to draw underneath of our little overhang, where our pillars are connected, because you will be able to see underneath of anything that is above the horizon line. So you can see underneath of that even if it's just a little. It's a good rule to remember. If it's above the horizon line, you can see underneath of it, and if it's below, you can see on top of it. So just for decoration, just put in a few little bricks, just guessing at the patterning of them. You can use the method for spacing the crenellations if you want to make them perfectly spaced. And there it is. Now let's draw a tower. I'm going to start out with a square drawn in perspective. And we're just going to extend that up. For however tall you want the tower to be, go a little further than that height, just to make sure you have enough there. And just like before, I'm going to use different color layers so I can tell one thing from another, just for my own reference. And we'll complete the top. If you want, you can also use 3D primitives for this. You don't have to actually draw it out. You can use a 3D cylinder and trace that shape. But just in case you want to draw it out yourself, here's how you do it. Now we're going to make our centering lines, just like we did before. So draw the X, and then from that X, you're going to divide it in the other direction, and that's where you'll find your center. Doing this and finding the center is also a good way if you want to do a tower that has a finial at the top. That'll need to be centered, or even when you're doing the little cone tops. That way you can see where the center of those go. Okay. Now that we have that, I'm going to draw the circle at the bottom. Well, it's really an ellipse. And I can tell you right now, this is going to be wrong. But I'll be able to fix it later. Usually the top one comes out a little more accurate for some strange reason. So I'll use the top one as my guide. Clean it up a little bit. Okay, use the top one as my guide, and then I'll be able to fix the bottom one. Okay, as you can see, it's wrong. So, but now that I know how wrong, I can easily go in and make sure that it touches our side walls. Now it's right. Okay. And there's our cylinder. They can also be octagons or hexagons. They don't have to be round. They can even be square. It's all a matter of the look that you want to go for. So now, I'm just going to move this out of the way so I can reuse that layer. And we've got our tower. So I'm going to make some more guidelines to show where I want the top of it to be a little separate. So make a guideline for how far I want that to come down. And we'll draw a curved line, and the other vertical lines are to show how far in I want the tower to go. Just going to retrace that. And you can do this the other way around. You can extend it outward at the top instead of coming in on the bottom. I just figured this method is a little easier to show than trying to extend the top part, which is how I did it for the picture that's in the opening. Okay. And now just for the opening at the top, I just used an ellipse And I'm going to use the transform tool to make it fit a bit better. You can draw it in there yourself if you want. Use the same method for centering with the X and dividing the X. And to do that, of course, you would leave the guideline at the top. This part is just to show where the shaping of it is. I don't know what to call it, but sometimes they kind of come in like this underneath. I like that look, so I like to put it in there. And if it's not quite perfect, like this one, I think it needs to be rotated just a little bit. So you can adjust it however it needs to be. Just to demonstrate what it would look like if the top of your tower is above the horizon. Just do another example. It's really no different than if your tower is below the horizon. The only difference is if your tower is above the horizon, you will not be able to see the opening in the top of it. More than likely see more of what's underneath, so I made that a little bit wider. And there you go. Thanks for watching, and I hope this will help you go and draw some castles of your own.